Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. On the program, we return to our All Things Africa edition, our journey across the continent and looking at the history and current affairs of each nation. Uh, we now explore, we're back on the mainland Africa, and we now explore West Africa. And the first country of West Africa we are exploring, and I've been wanting to do this country for weeks, and that is
Okay.
exploring the West African country of Nigeria. And who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our returning champion, the brilliant historian and journalist and activist Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire, and also frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, who will be our guide to Nigeria's history and current affairs. One moment. Yes, Nigeria's history and current affairs. Uh, so Abayomi, first off, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for your ongoing interest in African history and African affairs.
And it's always an honor to have you. And also some very sad news I have to share. This week, those who follow One Plus One, who follow African affairs, and who follow the Black Left and the Black Left's affairs, both in Turtle Island and elsewhere, probably know that sadly, an independent news outlet which covers a lot of African affairs with a Pan-Africanist leftist perspective, Africa Stream unfortunately has to shut down its operations due to very extreme censorship. And some other very sad news is, unfortunately, One Plus One also has to discontinue doing its operations, but do not weep yet. I'm still going to be doing the Africa series. So me and Abayomi, we will continue to cover all of the African countries. But unfortunately, I myself have been facing extreme censorship these days. I'm simply unable to share my content on Facebook groups and so forth. And without my Facebook groups and me sharing my program on Facebook, I basically don't have an audience, and the audience is already way too low. One Plus One to serve a much larger audience than what we get. But unfortunately, with this extreme censorship that I too have been facing, unfortunately, One Plus One cannot continue. But because we started our Africa journey, we will continue doing our Africa journey. And the only thing I ask, if people really do not want One Plus One to disband itself, is, and I'm begging people, I'm literally begging people, is you need to share One Plus One's content. If you donate to One Plus One, that would be very great. But much more important is actually to share One Plus One's content. If you don't share One Plus One's content and help us overcome not just the far right algorithms, but the media monopoly that Western media and Western state media has, then sorry, folks, One Plus One simply cannot do the journalism we do, because a lot of times guests are even hesitant to come on small programs like this unless they're very popular and have a large audience. So it's really up to you, the audience. If you want to help One Plus One, now, donating would be very good, but actually, right now, it's actually way more important if folks share the content widely on Facebook, through email, wherever it is that you engage in social media. And until that radically turns around and we have an audience of at least 100 viewers or even more consistent, I'm just asking the views to be in the hundreds, then unfortunately, unless that radically changes, I'm afraid that One Plus One has to call it quits. But we will not say goodbye just yet. We will still continue doing our Africa series. But unless folks want One Plus One to continue, then I really am begging folks really do have to share widely the content and at least get us to having a consistent 100% view rating. But we are not but we are not going to cry yet. I am not going to say goodbye yet. We are still doing our Africa series.
Great,
Because I
great.
owe it to you, and
Yeah,
just for my own personal selfishness and my own interest, I'm loving the Africa series, and it's always a real honor that Abayomi actually devotes so much time to us. So,
Well, let me just say that I
yes.
remember Africa Stream. I think it was last year. They were attacked by the Biden administration, saying that they were going to shut them down. The former Secretary of State said it was a propaganda outlet that was anti-American, pro-Russian, whatever. But they attacked them, and I remember they went off the air for a while. But yeah, all this stuff is going on, and it's an information war. You have a lot of shadow blocking that goes on Facebook, where you're not really clear how many people can actually see the post that you're doing. So it's very interesting what's happening, but it shows that the information that's being put out, how dangerous it is to the status quo.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and actually another sad thing is on my Facebook I've shared on my personal Facebook because 1+1 doesn't have a 1+1. 1+1 does not have a Facebook page
Yeah.
because we had it for we had it for a couple of months, and year one turned into year two, and it simply wasn't getting a lot of engagement on it. So I consciously chose to dissolve it. But that being
Yeah.
said, Press TV, which you're often invited on to speak on all sorts of issues. Press TV has had it really, really bad due to the sanctions on Iran. Ever since Sarkozy, it actually started with Sarkozy. Sarkozy was the first one to attack Press TV and their French, their French station, and then the
Mhm.
British media, particularly Andrew Neil of the BBC, had a huge vendetta against Press TV. And because of that, when you go on Press TV, sometimes the website simply doesn't work. When you try to watch so much of their videos, you are unable to watch it. And
Mm.
even when you try to download Press TV's many wonderful documentaries or their current affairs programs or even their documentary reviews program, you're simply unable to do that. And that is because of heavy sanctions and a lot of sabotage that the Western
Mhm.
imperialists, Israel, and their allies in West Asia use against Iran. So folks, it really is all hands on deck. You don't have to agree with everything of RT, which unfortunately they too have had to shut down their operations in America, and now RT is a shadow of itself and it's banned in all NATO countries. You don't have to agree with everything Press TV does, but folks, sometimes your allies are not going to be perfect allies, and these are the places which actually platform leftist voices, anti-imperialist voices. And again, if you do not stick out your neck and look, nobody likes it when when friends of ours attack us for our political opinions and so forth. But if you do not help out these outlets, this is what happens. The censorship wins. And I think it's very sad that Africa Stream has had to close its operations, which again shows you social media, putting aside a lot of the flaws of social media, but social media is independent media, left wing media, anti imperialist media. It's our only gateway to bypassing corporate media. And if we do not have social media, if we're unable to share our own content on social media, in different Facebook groups, or even having our own Facebook pages, Instagram pages, YouTube pages, then that's it. Then we basically can't do journalism. We all have to find other we basically have to even actually give up on journalism and find just normal 9 to 5 jobs. So that being
Well,
said,
you may
so
have to
that
go
being
back to the old methods, which, now I don't know if they'll work. I mean, print, leaflets, newspapers, magazines, newsletters, broadsides, all that kind of stuff can work locally.
yeah,
But internationally, it's much slower. And I think that the
exactly.
people who control a lot of the social media outlets are supporters of the right wing. For example,
Exactly.
you look at
Elon
X, which
Musk.
used to
Yeah.
be Twitter. Now they've fallen out with the Trump administration, uh, but in recent months, he's been a lot more open and less censoring than Facebook. Interestingly enough, Facebook, of course, Zuckerberg is
Yeah.
also allied with Donald Trump. So yeah, the so-called tech bros, were important in the reemergence of Donald Trump last year, who became president again for the second time. So
Exactly.
yeah, these people are definitely uh, behind Trump, and it's going to be very difficult because if they're deliberately targeting African-oriented networks, then it's going to be a serious problem. Yeah.
Yeah, and and it's a huge loss. And and again, I say this with a very heavy heart. I really do not want to. I really
Yeah.
don't want to stop doing 1+1. I love doing it, but it
Mm-hmm.
is one of those things where if you don't have enough audience, and if people are reluctant to come on your program because you don't have a huge audience,
Mm-hmm.
then unfortunately the 1+1 does have to disband, and that's why I really am begging the audience to share widely our content. And if you yourselves are having problems sharing on the social media, then email to your friends or email to left-wing websites, anti-imperialist websites, and say, look, can you please uh, can you please put 1+1 as part of your website so that we can watch it, so that the audience can grow. So,
Mm-hmm.
but to
Well,
no worries, folks.
in terms
Yeah.
in regard to Press TV, also under Biden, they shut down the presstv.com website, but you can still get it in the States. Anyway, I don't know about in Europe at presstv.ir.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah, you can still
But
pick it up
but
there.
Press
And
TV, but Press TV IR has been having lots of problems. So
mhm,
when I go to Press TV IR, which is in English,
right.
because of sanctions, you're unable to download a lot of the stuff. You're unable to even watch a lot of the videos and so forth.
Wow. Mm,
Many times, Press TV and their various sister channels have actually been censored on YouTube, just completely
yeah,
shut
they
down on
were.
YouTube and so forth. And Dr. Mara Osman of the brilliant MIDI Stream and Expose, she herself has also been censored on YouTube. So
Hmm.
unless there's other alternative ways of sharing an audience, then then then
Hmm.
this is why people really do have to fight against the censorship. And I'm not saying that people have to align with the far right in terms of fight against censorship,
Right.
but if people don't
Yeah.
fight against the censorship, then sooner or later
Hmm.
sooner or later they will then start to target the really popular outlets
Yeah.
like Minpress News, like Black Agenda Report, like Consortium News, like the Gray Zone, World Socialist website, and so forth. So, yeah,
Yeah, I think Press TV now is back on Facebook. It's called Press TV Programs. And I've shared a number of them over the last couple of weeks on the anti-imperialism Facebook page. They do come through, at least on my computer. Um, you can watch them and, see, different segments about the US bombing of Iran and the whole situation that's going on in Palestine, the genocide and so forth. So they're up now, but who knows for how long. And, I've shared them on the anti-imperialism Facebook page and they appear to be coming through. So we'll see what happens. But this is an ongoing communication and technology war that's taking
exactly.
place. So we have to figure out how to navigate this, to keep, our audiences up and also make sure that they're not able to totally obliterate our context, our content.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and until there's an alternative, or there's some kind of rival on Facebook which people use to stay in touch with one another, or to
Hmm.
have means of sharing journalism. Until that happens,
Yeah.
it's until that happens, you cannot say to people, "Oh, just just go off of Facebook, just completely disconnect. No, this is
A lot
our
of people have,
like our only way of sharing alternative media and so forth. So
but a
it's the
lot
only
of people
reason why I
have,
went to Facebook,
yeah.
in which all of my friends and so forth are using. I have to use Facebook, but if Facebook is censoring me or is blocking
Hmm.
me from sharing content, then
Hmm.
then unfortunately 1+1 does have to discontinue.
Hmm.
But we still are going to be doing our Africa series. We still have a lot to to do with that. So do not worry
Yeah, but
until then.
the thing about Facebook is that a lot of young people and others have gone off of it. You know, they don't even use it anymore. They use Twitter, which is X now, Instagram, and other platforms. Twitch is another one they use because they say, Facebook is like for older people, but there's still a lot of young people on it.
Exactly.
But the thing is, a lot of people have, you know, jumped off of Facebook. There have been problems, I know, with ads. That's the problems we had taking out ads. Uh, they would say,
Okay.
"Oh, this violates our community standards," and
Yeah.
you say, "Well, what? In what way?" And they won't give you a specific answer. They send you this sheet with a lot of broad, unspecific things that you're not supposed to do, and you can't get any direct communication with anybody. It's not a 1-800 number or 1-888 number
Exactly.
that you could call and say, "Hey,
Exactly.
what's
And then
wrong with my ads that I'm trying to buy on Facebook?"
no, and
They
then
just blow
also
you off. So these are the problems that they're having. But I think,
and then also when it comes to the whole issue of spam and so forth like that, and
yeah,
I can sort of understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, if you're a person on Facebook who, you know, uh, you're sharing your content. Sometimes you have to explain what the content is, why it's relevant to groups. If you have to go to every single Facebook group and try to change the wording there, I can tell you, you literally end up fainting from doing that. Which is why when it comes to the iPhone and so forth, it's very easy. You just sort of copy and paste it. You can share 10 groups and so forth, and then you don't have to spend over 2 or 3 hours of your time
hmm,
sharing when it's directly on the laptop and so forth. So they're trying to say that that's spam at the same time, but at the end of the day,
hmm,
it's up to the moderators themselves. If the moderators want to block
hmm.
whatever content I share, okay, it sucks, but okay, that's your prerogative. But when you have some unnamed entity on Facebook that says this is spam, we're blocking, then that's the final nail in the
Hey,
coffin, as they say.
hey, yeah. Well, this is the battle that we're waging right now, and when the even Facebook when they first opened, they appeared to be a lot more open, in terms of
Yeah,
content. But even in the earlier days, people told me they had their pages shut down for no particular reason, particularly those that dealt with Palestinian issues and other issues. So, it's an ongoing struggle,
yeah,
ongoing struggle. Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
But all right, let's get on to
Okay.
excuse me, folks. Okay, let's get on to the let's get back to our tour across the African
Okay.
continent. And yes, Nigeria. So as always, Abayomi, as always, tell us what was Nigeria like before British colonization. How did it become an Anglo colony, and what were the conditions of the people under British colonization?
Yes, Nigeria has a ancient history, and one of the earliest civilizations that have been quote discovered unquote is the Nok civilization, NOK civilization, which they have dated back at least until 1500 BC, up until about the first century of the Christian era. And this civilization is well documented. It was located in the north central region of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which is known today. But it also extended to other areas which today fall outside the Federal Republic of Nigeria. They're known for their terracotta artwork. In terms of the Noke civilization, they were also involved in iron smelting, going back centuries and centuries. There was also the discovery of the Dafuna canoe, which is a seaworthy or river-worthy vessel that has been dated as far back as 8,000 to 8,500 BC. This is absolutely phenomenal. The fact that Africans in the western region of the continent had canoes, we're talking about 8,500 years ago, potentially. So these are very, very interesting facts about how Nigeria had developed prior to the intervention of imperialism. There was also, I mentioned the iron metallurgy. That was something that was discovered early on. Then, of course, you had different forms of civilizations. You had the hunting and gathering cultures, and there were also the more agriculturally based civilizations and cultures that existed in West Africa. The Noke culture purportedly had a combination of both the hunting and gathering cultures as well as the development of agriculture in West Africa. And what did they grow? They grew agricultural products like millet and beans. And of course, with the hunting and gathering, that was largely around animals. Yeah, so artifacts from this area have been heavily looted for decades. You have Noke artwork, which is very humanistic, that is located in museums throughout Europe and North America.
Yeah.
This is the tragedy of the historical legacy of African culture. The fact that all of these, many of these civilizations and cultures had developed distinctive and very, very advanced artwork going back way before the Christian era is a clear indication of the advanced civilizations that existed in this region. But as I said, a lot of this stuff was ripped off by Europeans during the period of enslavement and also during the colonial period as well. And as I said, a lot of this stuff is in Western museums, even up until this day. Some of it has been returned, but there's a lot more that needs to be returned. This is the earlier artifacts from the civilization. There were also other cultures and civilizations. The Hausa city-states were well known for centuries in West Africa. They had interactions with people in other parts of West Africa and North Africa. And of course, the Hausa city-states were located in the northern part of what is considered today the Federal Republic of Nigeria. You also had the Yoruba civilizations of Ife and Oyo. They too developed their own artwork and advanced civilizations. Then there was the people of the South and the Southeast. In Nigeria, it's mainly categorized by three major groups.
Yeah.
You have the Hausa, Fulani groups of the North, the Yoruba peoples, which developed city-states and civilizations in the western part of the country. And then, of course, the Igbo people in the south and southeast part of the country. These three major groups make up about 60% of the overall population in the Federal Republic of Nigeria, even up until today. So all of these civilizations and cultures existed. Among the Igbo people of the southeast, they had the kingdom of Nri, and that was, of course, also an advanced civilization. And so, yes, Africa in the western part of the continent did have advanced civilizations and cultures prior to the intervention of the Atlantic slave trade and later British colonialism. The Portuguese came to this area. Lagos, which is the commercial capital of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, was also known as Iko. They arrived there during the 16th century. They set up trading forts there and eventually began to involve themselves in what was known as the transatlantic slave trade.
Okay.
The Bite of Biafra, it's an interesting term utilized, was an area that was a heavily concentrated area for slave capturing and export between 1519 and 1700. So this did a lot to disrupt the traditional cultures and civilizations of the West Africa region. You had also the Benin Empire, which is associated with the Edo people. And the Benin Empire was also an advanced African civilization. They had developed outstanding artwork, statues, jewelry, and other forms of artistic expression. A lot of this artwork was stolen. It is in European and US museums. The British invaded in 1851 at the port of Lagos and began to cause all kinds of destruction. They capitalized on the divisions among the Yoruba peoples during that particular time period. There was an internal conflict over who was going to actually rule in the Yoruba civilizations in the 1850s. And they were able to win over factions that were at odds with other particular factions. And this continued all the way to the end of the 19th century. You had the establishment of the Royal Africa Company, which was mainly a looting operation where they took out the agricultural products, gold, artwork for the benefit of the European and imperialist powers. So around 1897, there was the conquering of the Benin civilization, and that's when they came under the boot of the British imperialists. And as I said before, a lot of stuff was taken, it was looted, it was sold, and even today, you find this artwork in these European capitals. Some of it is starting to be returned to their rightful owners on the African continent. But obviously, this stuff is very, very valuable. And human capital is also very important because in that same region, it became known as the quote slave coast unquote during the 16th
slave what?
Slave coast. Yeah,
Slave
it was known as
coast.
the slave coast.
Okay.
The Bight of Biafra, the area around Nigeria and Cameroon was heavily looted and heavily impacted by the Atlantic slave trade. So this disrupted the capacity of the civilizations to sustain themselves, to reproduce themselves. So eventually, after 1897 and the early years of the 20th century, the British were able to take over Nigeria. And by 1914, they had consolidated the southern areas of the country with the central and northern areas, and they established the colony of Nigeria around 1914. So this is what happened. And immediately, of course, there were struggles that were waged to overturn the colonial system, yet the divisions that were imposed under colonialism were reinforced. The divisions between people in the south of the country, the west of the country, and the north of the country still exist today. These divisions were carried over into the independence period that took place after 1960. So what we see
and how and well actually talk a bit about those differences because there's there's a Muslim Christian divide, a sectarianism, tribalism when it comes to the North and the South, correct?
Yeah, what happened was that during the period of the pre-colonial period, the Fulanese people had adopted Islam, and a man by the name of Fodio had overturned, the Yoruba kingdoms and set up the Sokoto Caliphate. The Sokoto Caliphate was an Islamic kingdom, and they existed and they played a tremendous role in spreading Islam in Nigeria. Today, the country is divided pretty much 50-50. 50% of the population adhere to Islam, other 50% adhere to Christianity, and there's also people who still practice traditional African religions.
Yes.
And some of these religious practices are incorporated into Christianity as well as Islam. So they haven't totally been obliterated in that regard. I keep using the term obliterated because of the Donald Trump in regard to his false claims about the Iranian civilian nuclear program.
Well, no problem. And many, well,
Yeah.
and many people would say that a lot of that a lot of indigenous African cultures has been obliterated because of West Asian forces, but also European colonialism, which we're going to have a very interesting conversation about much later in the program. But before we get into that, okay, so there's that north-south divide, and the Christians are in the south and the Muslims in the north.
Yeah, the North is heavily Islamic. Heavily Islamic. Yeah, because they're considered the dominant population inside the country. The Hausa and the Fulanese and other groups are mainly Muslim oriented. So, that's been an ongoing power struggle in the post-independence period as well.
Okay, then that's a perfect segue into this question. How did Nigeria become independent, and was it a peaceful transition or when a violent struggle? And I'll already ask them this third question. So do answer those two. But then my third question is: talk to us about what were the conditions that led to the breakaway Republic of Biafra in Nigeria, and why was the Nigerian state so astonishingly and grotesquely brutal in forcing Biafra to stay in an unhappy marriage with Nigeria? Britain supported Nigeria's brutal takeover of Biafra, but I also want to know what was the response of the rest of the West, the global South, the USSR, Cuba, the Eastern Bloc, and the Eastern Bloc communist nations.
Well, yes, in terms of the independence struggle, it coincided with efforts that were taking place across the African continent. Figures like Nnamdi Azikiwe, my namesake, had studied in the United States between 1925 and 1935. He studied at Howard University and Lincoln University. And he returned to the Gold Coast during the late 1930s. And they established a newspaper called the West African Pilot. Now, that newspaper was very instrumental in promoting independence struggles that were taking place across Africa. Talking about the Italian intervention in Abyssinia. They talked about the horrific conditions under which Africans lived under the colonial system. And that newspaper was banned by the British. It was based in the Gold Coast. So this is one aspect of the independence struggle. Then later you had other formations that came into play. A man by the name of Herbert Macaulay was a proponent of Nigerian independence. Funmilayo Ransom Kuti, who was the mother of Fela Ransom Kuti, was also a proponent of national independence in Nigeria. And was more left-wing oriented than a number of the other political parties and figures. In fact, it's reported that she had been invited to China. She met with Mao Zedong. So that's a very interesting avenue that needs to be explored deeper. But yes, they became independent in October of 1960. They still remained a part of the British Commonwealth system, where the Queen was still the titular head of state of Nigeria. The early independence days were, was characterized by a lot of turmoil, because you still had these regional divisions that existed inside the country. Inside the military, for example, it has been reported that the people from the North were heavily dominant within the post-independence military structures. So all these different political parties were vying for political dominance. You had Nnamdi Azikiwe's party, the NC. They were in existence. There were other Yoruba-based parties, Hausa-based parties that existed inside the country. And things started to break down after the first administration. By 1966, the situation was in a deep crisis. There were two military coups d'etats in 1966. And of course, they resulted in the assassinations of two of the key independence leaders, Amadou Bello and Abubakar Tafiya Balewa. They were assassinated during these coups d'etats in 1966. Then there was an episode of mass killings, massacres of the Igbo people in the north of the country. This was in 1966, late 1966. And then in early 1967, the governor of the eastern region, a man by the name of Ojukwu, declared the eastern region independent of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and declared it the Republic of Biafra, which is interesting because the whole labeling of the Bita Biafra, meaning, the Atlantic shorelines around Nigeria and other countries in West Africa. So they took that name and became the Republic of Biafra. Of course, the central government in Nigeria, which at that time was controlled by the military, a man by the name of Gowon, had served in that capacity, and they immediately set out to crush what they perceived as being a rebellion in the eastern region of the country. It was a horrendous situation that existed for 3 years. Many people died, particularly people in the eastern region. They did not have the capacity to take on the Nigerian military, which they were slow to mobilize, but eventually they were able to go in and retake the eastern region of the country by the early months of 1970. But you had asked who supported Biafra and who was against it. Well, of course, the Federal Republic of Nigeria was against it, but it was a lot of division that exists. I understand the Catholic Church had given some support to the Igbo people when they broke off and formed the Republic of Biafra. Others did not support them. In this country, the left seemed to be divided during that particular time period. Some people saw the struggle there as being analogous to a lot of the liberation movements that had existed in the United States during that particular time period. But the Biafran rebellion was crushed by 1970. They were reincorporated into the Federal Republic of Nigeria. But even today, there are efforts to try to revive this secessionist movement. There's a guy who was actually arrested by the Nigerian government 3 or 4 years ago and held for an extended period of time. He had set up a Radio Biafra network that was promoting secessionist politics inside the country. But I don't see that happening in terms of the partitioning of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Even though there's a lot of divisions inside the country, I don't think the majority of the people outside of the East, and even some in the East, would support further partitioning of the country. But it's a very, very tumultuous, and was characterized by a lot of turmoil inside the country during that particular time period. But that is what happened, and it can't not be erased from the post-colonial history of Nigeria. But it's also indicative of what happened in other countries as well. There are civil wars, for example, in Sudan. There's one taking place right now in Cameroon. During the period of early independence, there was the question of the Cameroon and southern Cameroon, northern Cameroon, some sections of that region, which was controlled by the British, they agreed to join in with the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Others decided to go with the French and join Cameroon. So there was a split which took place between the people who had been colonized by the British and those who had been colonized by the French. And unfortunately, that situation has continued on a violent level in Cameroon today. There are people who want to form a Republic of Abayomi, which would be a English-speaking nation within the broader Cameroon. So all these divisions have been taking place in West Africa. Today in Nigeria, outside of what is being articulated by the people of Biafra, this group that calls itself, they want to resurrect the Biafran struggle to separate from Nigeria. But at the same time, this is no solution to the ethnic conflicts that a lot of it was imposed by British imperialism. They deliberately used a system of indirect rule that separated people in various regions of the country. They also separated people, separated the Africans in Nigeria, let's say for example, with Africans who were under British colonialism in other parts of West Africa, for example, the Gold Coast. Because you had a lot of migration. There are a lot of Nigerians who had migrated to areas in northern Ghana. Some were expelled during the early period of Kwame Nkrumah. Then later in the 1980s, there was a huge expulsion of Ghanaians from Nigeria back to Ghana. So these divisions, in my opinion, have been promoted and institutionalized by the imperialist system. So in 1967, as you mentioned, the country was divided and the Nigerian military had to mobilize to put down this rebellion. It took them 3 years to do so. Then there were efforts to reunite the people of the East with the rest of the country. You mentioned Fela. He was one of the people who was promoting this unification of Nigeria as a whole, but nonetheless, he had his own problems with the Nigerian military governments, successive Nigerian military governments. You had Gowon, and then later you had Murtala Muhammad, who was assassinated. Murtala Muhammad was more of a populist military leader, and he only stayed in power for a brief period of time. But a lot of Nigerians who were in the country during that particular time period claim that the conditions inside the country improved under his leadership, Murtala Muhammad's leadership. He was assassinated.
I have to ask these two questions before we talk about the different heads of states. Well, firstly, what was the response of the global South, the various Latin American countries, the USSR, Cuba, the Eastern Bloc communist countries, and much of the West? I know that Britain explicitly, or well, they secretly, but they also explicitly, supported Nigeria's brutal takeover of Biafra. But what was the response of the U.S., Canada, Australia, the rest of the global South, the USSR, Cuba, Eastern Bloc communist nations, and so forth?
My understanding is that the Soviet Union supported the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the central government at that time, which was based in Lagos.
Oh, did they?
Yes.
Oh, that USSR.
I'm not clear what China's position was. They may have given some critical support to the Biafrans because of the ideological struggle that was going on, the so-called Sino-Soviet split, which had developed starting in the late 50s over the Great Leap Forward economic policy, the withdrawal of Soviet advisors from China. And this continued through the early 1960s all the way up to the late 1960s, when unfortunately the Communist Party of China described the Soviet Union as social imperialists. So
Yes, yeah.
once this happened, of course, you had the split, among the two largest, countries within the socialist camp. So this had an impact on politics on a domestic and regional level. You had parties that were allied with the Soviet Union. These are left parties and other left parties that were allied with China.
Awful,
So,
terrible
yeah.
historical thing that happened, the Sino-Soviet split. And
Yeah.
China actually, I mean, to show you how how bad it is for the audience, China, for example, supported Pol Pot's regime, and for a period
Yeah.
of time also supported apartheid South Africa, and also supported the reactionary Western-backed Wahhabi Takfiri death squads, which we now call the Taliban in Afghanistan, against whereas the Soviets were more supportive of Vietnam, much more supportive of the communist regime in Afghanistan, trying to eradicate these backwards Islamist death squads and so forth. So that's interesting. But the USSR also made some mistakes. I don't think that was.
Really?
I don't think it was right for the USSR to support Nigeria's, certainly not its brutal suppression of Biafra. I think one can have differences of opinion whether it comes to self determination for the Biafrans, but it was very grotesque, very disgusting. What the British-backed Nigerian government did to the people of Biafra, but
Yes.
continue.
Yeah, but in terms of China, yeah, there was this split that took place, and it had an impact on the liberation movements and also among the left in Africa and Asia, Latin America. For example, the situation in Indonesia in 1965, which had the second largest communist party in Asia at that time. A lot of those people were wiped out at the aegis of the Central Intelligence Agency. They claimed that the Indonesian Communist Party was trying to stage a coup and take over the country from the initial nationalist leadership of
Sukarno.
Sukarno, right. So anyway, these people were some of the founders of the non-aligned movement. The first Bandung Conference was held in Indonesia in 1955. This led to a series of meetings up to 1960 and 1961, when the non-aligned movement was formed. And the idea behind the non-aligned movement was that the global South would not take sides with the Soviet Union or with the United States. Now, in terms of China, they were not a part of the non-aligned movement, but initially, they did have an observer at the Bandung Conference, which is quite interesting.
Exactly,
very interesting indeed. But yes, today you have the Group of 77 plus China, which is a massive organization because it constitutes about 80% of the global population. The Group of 77 plus China. The non-aligned movement still exists. Right now, it's chaired by the Ugandan president, Youri Museveni. And he also hosted the Group of 77 plus China, their most recent summit as well. So yes, all this was going on. And in terms of the divisions in the socialist camp, that was very, very detrimental. And some groups attempted to advocate unity within the socialist camp, and at the same time not being biased towards the Soviet Union or towards China. So I think this was the most correct position to take because even during the 1960s and 1970s, when you had people like Lin Biao, for example, a leading figure in the Communist Party of China, who had the slogan, victory to people's war, and all of this. And then, of course, the split that took place in 1971, when Lin Biao disappeared, they claimed he had attempted to stage a coup against Mao and the majority on the Central Committee in the Communist Party of China. And they said he took a plane and was heading to the Soviet Union, and the plane crashed. Who knows, if that story is accurate or not. But yeah, China underwent divisions internally within their party. And Mao Zedong in 1971 opened up dialogue with the United States, secret missions, ping pong, diplomacy, eventually the visit by Richard Nixon to China in 1972. But it wasn't until 1979 that they actually, quote, normalized, unquote, relations with the United States. They opened up their country to U.S. investment and student exchange and a lot of other exchanges that took place between the two countries.
Yeah.
A lot of people saw this as the death knell of the socialist system in China, and I don't agree with that position at all.
Exactly.
In fact, right now, China is right on the heels of the United States in terms of its economic development. And they still maintain that they're a socialist country. The Communist Party of China is still in power in Beijing. But anyway, back to Nigeria. I mentioned that the mother of Fela had been instrumental in the independence struggle. After independence, of course, the contradictions that had developed. And by the mid-1970s, people like Fela Anílàpọ̀ Kuti had become strong critics of the military regime in Nigeria, to the point.
But before we get into that, okay. I do want to ask this question about Biafra. So safe to say there was deep divisions and a lot of incoherence when it came to the global South, the socialist bloc, and so forth. Then
it was.
Okay, then
a lot of the pro-China groups in the U.S. Sided with the Biafran rebellion.
Okay, then in that case, let me ask this question then about Biafra, because something that always bothers me about situations like Biafra or the Kurdish wars of independence in Turkey or places in West Asia that have large Kurdish populations that express calls for independence because they feel marginalized, that their culture and language isn't respected. Or India, which suppresses a lot of its Sikh separatists and expresses anger over Pakistan seceding from India. Now,
Kashmir,
if these places like India, like Turkey, and so forth, don't want to see such and such a region from seceding them, or Sri Lanka when it comes to the Tamils. And their arguments are, I understand their arguments that they're all one people, one nation, etc. Then, well, why don't they respect the people then? Why are they constantly marginalizing and going out of their way to brutalizing and borderline engaging in pogroms or genocide? Now, because respect goes both ways, and I just find it stunning how places like Turkey and India, they claim they're shocked by Kurdish separatist movement or breakaway places like Pakistan, and yet the masses of those places, Turkey and India, keep supporting ethno-nationalist regimes. Turkey's a great example. When we talk about India and the Hindu fundamentalist movement, these are deeply Islamophobic folks who want to conserve the caste system. So then you have a place like Nigeria, which is not tolerating Biafra's independence, but then they force them into a very unhappy arranged marriage on these people. So so explain what goes through the mentality of a state that subjugates its people in a unhappy arranged marriage, like
Well, in Nigeria, for example, as I mentioned, you have three major groups: ethnic groups, language groups, so forth. The Hausa, Fulani, the Yoruba, and the Igbo peoples, and the other peoples in the southern part of the country constitute about 60% of the population. The thinking could be, okay, if we allow the Igbo people in the south to succeed, what's going to stop the Yorubas in the western part of the country wanting to form their own nation state, which they had during the pre-colonial period. A lot of these divisions were drawn by the British colonialists. A lot of the turmoil was created by the Atlantic slave trade. We mentioned the slave coast, which encompassed Nigeria, Cameroon, and other countries in the region as well. What happens if the Hausa city-states or the Sokoto Caliphate wants to resurrect itself? You won't have a country. You'll have, micro-nationalism. That's what you'll have. So it's a very difficult process. And we could say that for Africa as a whole. Rationally, in terms of Africa moving forward, what Kwame Nkrumah talked about and others, Africa must unite. We must have a singular political, economic, cultural, and military system in order to compete with the European Union, with the United States, and also to be on par with other countries. For example, the Russian Federation or the People's Republic of China. So it's a contradiction. On the one hand, you have the carryover of the pre-slave, pre-colonial cultures and civilizations, which were disrupted by the intervention of the Atlantic slave trade and European colonialism. The nations that were declared independent were largely constructs of the imperialist system. Mm-hmm. So this is the contradiction, okay? So when these countries become independent, you still have these divisions that exist, had existed during the colonial period, prior to the colonial period, but at the same time, the conditions under which people have lived, the discrimination which was institutionalized in the country. For example, in Nigeria, the Igbo people are perceived by other people in the country as being, how should I say it, more privileged. They were allowed to have exposure to Western educational institutions. That's why you have a lot of literary figures who come from the Igbo people. People like Chinua Achebe, for example, who was an anti-colonial writer who emerged in the 1950s and 1960s. Unfortunately, he supported the Biafran rebellion of 1967 to 1970. He supported it. You had people, the current writer, who's very, very popular, woman writer, she's of Igbo descent as well.
Yes, and I'm also blanking on her name, but she wrote, actually, I do have at least the title of her book.
Yeah.
One moment.
Heavily, does a lot of work, literary work. She's very much in demand at universities for lectures and so forth. So yes, a lot of the intellectuals come out of it. Nnamdi Azikiwe came out of the that same milieu, the Igbo milieu.
Yes. I believe. Yes. Okay. I'm going to butcher her name, so forgive me, folks, for that. But the writer you're referring to, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and
yes.
her. She did a very popular book, Half of a Yellow Sun, mm-hmm. and where she very much takes the side of the Biafrans, and mm-hmm. rightly so. She denounces the grotesque human mm-hmm. rights abuses, the borderline genocidal war that Nigeria mm-hmm. waged in forcing the Biafrans, back into the country. But continue on with what you were saying about
and Achebe as well. As I mentioned, had supported that rebellion. In one book, which is a collection of short stories, he has a story in there called Girls of War. He talks about the role of women in the Biafran rebellion. Yes. But even despite these errors, Achebe is still recognized as a major literary figure in African history. And, when he passed away more than 10 years ago, there was a lot of praise for his contribution in regard to the anti-colonial struggle. His books like Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, deal with the negative impact of British colonialism on Nigerian society. Yes. a
But
man of the people.
but do you find, because it sounds to me as if because it sounds to me as if as if you yourself aren't too supportive of an idea of Biafra being independent. Now, is that because
No, no, I'm a Pan-Africanist, and
okay, okay,
I
go ahead, continue.
realize, for example, that there are contradictions that exist in a country like Nigeria, which has over 230 million people, which had within it and without it uh, ancient and traditional cultures and civilizations that were disrupted by historical circumstances. But how do we correct that? Do we correct that by going back to the pre-slave, pre-colonial cultures and civilization, or do we move forward in regard to forming alliances? Nigeria, for example, the official national language is English, which supports the whole idea of national unity. Uh, I have no problem with that. Uh,
Okay.
but the contradiction, of course, is that Nigeria is a capitalist system. It's never been a socialist country or even socialist oriented country. And even the socialists and left parties, they have never been able to take power on a national level. Even the Nigerian Labour Party in the last elections, uh, uh, it was thought they would win. They won the Lagos state elections. So looking at that, you assume, wow, in Lagos, you have all kinds of people who come from different parts of the national framework. You have all different languages being spoken there, people who are Igbo background,
So,
Yoruba, Hausa, Fulanese, Edo, all of them are there. The Labour Party won, Peter Obi won the elections in that state, but yet lost the national elections. And he was trying to challenge, and he's from the South, so it could have been discrimination within the body politics of Nigeria, not allowing him to take office. But he tried to challenge in the courts the elections, but it never went anywhere. And Olusegun Obasanjo, who was one of the military leaders, who eventually turned over the government to a multi-party system. This occurred in 1979, and they had their first multi-party elections since 1964. It's amazing, 15 years. And Olusegun Obasanjo won those elections, even though he was a military man. But he's considered a statesman, negotiator, elder of Africa, and so forth. He was involved in the negotiations surrounding the independence of Zimbabwe in the late 1970s. Zimbabwe became at the Lancaster House. They had threatened the British to cut off oil supplies and other commodities if the British didn't settle the situation in Zimbabwe in 1979. That's when they had the Lancaster House negotiations and discussions that led to the first democratic multi-party elections in Zimbabwe in April of 1980. But what I'm saying is that Africa has to move forward. That's why the Organization of African Unity was formed.
so,
Was, yeah,
do you think so? So hypothetically, let's say Biafra was allowed its divorce from Nigeria.
okay,
So if we put it in the present context, because we do have to
okay.
compare all of Africa's unique situations, do
Mm.
you think Biafra would have been would very much be Eritrea, is not a failed state, although it's heavily sanctioned. But do you find that just like the people who want to break that support Tigray secession from Ethiopia, or the radicals who want Somaliland to divorce from Somalia, I am of the opinion that it's not going to solve the legitimate grievances that those people have. It's only going to create further chaos in Africa, like what we saw with South Sudan breaking away from Sudan. That's not helped out the people of South Sudan, nor the people of Sudan. All it has brought is yet another failed African state with bitter divisions. So therefore, all these people have have legitimate grievances which do need
Yes.
to be dealt with. the Kurdish people have legitimate grievances in Iran, in Iraq, in
Mm-hmm.
Syria, which do need to be dealt with. The Tamils have legitimate grievances and do need to be dealt with, but all of them breaking away. I guess if we, I guess we should do whatever referendums if they still want to be married. But the problem is that all of them breaking away from their countries is not going to solve a lot of the legitimate grievances. What is needed is socialism, an end to
Mm-hmm.
ethno-nationalism, an end
Mm-hmm.
to reverse racism and so forth, an end to sectarianism, and a socialist program, both economically and culturally, that actually celebrates the unique diversities, but
Mm-hmm.
also says that we are one people. Yeah, is yeah, yeah. I'm curious your response to that.
Yes, and you could also add the Western Sahara, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, which is still being occupied by the Kingdom of Morocco. Uh, the Spanish, who we talked about last week in regard to Equatorial Guinea, uh, left during the early 1970s, and they ceded that territory over to the Mauritanians and the Moroccans. The Mauritanians relinquished any claim to the Western Sahara, but Morocco wanted to keep it because of the presence of phosphates in that area, which could be, marketed to the Western industrialized countries and other countries throughout the world. In Nigeria, for example, in the South, you have large concentrations of oil. In
Yeah,
1956, oil production began in Nigeria 4 years before national independence. So any government that takes power in Abuja now is the political capital of Nigeria. They're not going to allow a section or a region of the country to succeed when the country is rich in petroleum resources and natural gas, agricultural products, and so forth. So what needs to happen is needs to be a countrywide movement that comes into existence that could actually transform the Federal Republic of Nigeria into a people's state. And there's tremendous amounts of repression against such a policy. As I mentioned, during the 1970s, under military leadership, critics of the government were met with ruthless suppression. Somebody like Fela Anikulapo Kuti, who's a Yoruba in
and
terms of
actually,
his ethnic background, was attacked, by people of his own ethnic group who were within the military during that particular time period because he was against military rule and he did not agree with how the military was governing Nigeria. He said it was corrupt and that there needed to be a fundamental change. He actually formed his own political party, attempted to form it in, I believe, 1970, right before the first multi-party elections that took place after a series of military leaders, such as Gowon, Murtala Muhammad, Olusegun Obasanjo. That was in 1979. So yes, it's been an ongoing struggle, but the government there has been highly repressive. Even last year, when they had the hashtag End Bad Governance campaign in Nigeria, it was repressed ruthlessly inside the country. People were talking about bad governance. They were saying they didn't have enough food for their households. So people were out in mass demonstrating in various parts of the country, carrying empty pots to illustrate the food deficits that exist inside the country. Many people were killed and arrested. What was interesting about this mass demonstrations and rebellions last year was that some of the youth who were involved in these demonstrations were flying Russian Federation flags. This alarmed the government. It alarmed the United States because they felt they were moving in the same direction as the Alliance of Sahel states, that in raising a Russian flag, that people were encouraging elements within the military who were dissatisfied with the system of governance in the Republic of Nigeria to overthrow the government, to overthrow a quote civilian unquote government and turn towards the Russian Federation. So it was heavily suppressed. And even some of the youth who were carrying these Russian flags were arrested. The guy who was manufacturing them was also arrested. And these people were charged with treason. And it was such an outrage that several months later they were released from detention. So it just shows us a tinderbox that exists there. I mentioned the
That's
last elections. Yeah.
that okay. So that's interesting. But basically, but in a nutshell, you think that uh, Africans who have this sort of ethno nationalism, even if it comes from a place of legitimate grievances, that's counterproductive to unity, which is needed. A Pan Africanist unity in which there is no more tribalism, sectarianism, and the kind of yeah, sort of
Right, right. Like
okay.
the old Soviet Union, for example, which broke up in 1991. It was declining, several years before that. Was composed of many different nationalities and ethnic groups, but they were able to come together for about 7 decades between well, the revolution was in 1917. The Soviet Union was formed later, but countries like Mongolia, for example, and Ukraine were all a part of it. Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, all those countries were a part of the USSR. It collapsed under pressure and
Yeah,
broke up. Then you had a series of wars, like between Georgia and the central government in Russia. The whole situation that developed between Azerbaijan and Armenia during the latter years of the USSR. Yeah. So it's a very complicated situation, but unity is the way forward. Whether it's the People's Republic of China and dealing with efforts to divide the country, for example, Taiwan or the so-called Republic of China, which is supported by the United States, is still considered part by the Chinese government as part of the People's Republic of China. They have not retaken it by force yet, although they said they could do it very easily if they wanted to. Hong Kong, similar situation. That was under British colonialism for many, many years, and they agreed to return Hong Kong to the People's Republic of China. And then they tried to foment a rebellion inside of Hong Kong with mass demonstrations and revolts and all this, which were crushed. But what was interesting about it, nobody was killed. They kept saying, this is vicious. This is a horrendous situation that the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese government is involving itself in Hong Kong, but there was not one documented death as a result of the activities of the police or the military inside of Hong Kong. So all these contradictions exist. You mentioned the Kurdish question. That goes back to the era of the rise of British and French colonialism. They had the Treaty of Lausanne, for example, I think was in 1923, which essentially sold out the people of Kurdistan. The Kurdistan people don't have the same political orientation. The PKK, which was considered itself a communist or Marxist liberation movement, has agreed through its leadership not only to put down their arms, but also to dissolve as a political party. This is what Öcalan is reported to have been saying from his jail cell. So all of these things are, very, very important, but it shows the complexity of the situation in post-colonial Africa.
And going back to Nigeria, yes, and going back to Nigeria, thank you for your answer. Very, very interesting answer when it comes to the whole issue of Biafra, which often is not properly addressed and is often criminally overlooked, even though it's a major part of Nigeria's history.
History. It
And
is.
and the whole issue when we talk about tribalism in Africa,
And
and
it still
also
has not been fully resolved. Like I said, you
and also
know,
there's also a dark side to Kurdish nationalism, which often isn't explored. Like in Iraq, for example,
yeah,
the the Kurdish nationalist parties were also engaged in a lot of a sectarianism, and when
Syria too.
ISIS
Yeah.
and when ISIS came
Mm-hmm.
about, when the ISIS death squads came about, they actually threw the Yazidi people under the bus. And in Syria, which was another Western effort to balkanize Syria, I think hopefully it doesn't happen in Syria, but I think given the situation now under the Western puppets,
Mm-hmm.
we might see Syria also balkanize, and the Kurdish ethno nationalists, which the West supported in Syria, were also engaging in a lot of places where they were kicking out minorities within Kurdish communities and so forth. So there
Mm-hmm.
is a dark side
Mm-hmm.
to sometimes the self-determination movements, which a lot of times the left
Mm-hmm.
supports, like the Tamil separatists in Sri Lanka, which have legitimate grievances which need to be addressed, and all of the Kurdish people have legitimate grievances which do need to be
Mm-hmm.
addressed, but sometimes another ethno-nationalist state is not the answer, and we always need to be very weary when the West sometimes supports. Although Biafra is a different story,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, but
Yeah, well, the thing is, the U.S. Fomented rebellion among the Kurdish people in Iraq, as well as in Syria. The YPG, which was like the Syrian arm of the PKK, they were supported by the U.S. in fighting against the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party government of the former president Bashar al-Assad, who was overthrown late last year. Now they have people in power who are reformed Al Qaeda elements. You know, they just put different clothes on them, gave them a haircut, you know, shaved their beards a little bit, and now they're considered the legitimate government of Syria. Trump lifted sanctions against Syria, yet the Zionists are in and out of Syria, you know, anytime they want. And just the other day, they bombed a Orthodox church in Damascus,
yes,
and
and
they
that
claim
very
that
government
ISIS.
and that very government, while that very government did denounce the ISIS suicide bomb
Mhm.
months before, and I think even currently right now they are engaging in mass sectarianism and I mean
Yeah.
and persecution of the various Christian groups and any group. Muslim groups themselves who don't subscribe to ISIS's
Mhm.
backwards Wahhabi ideology. So
Yeah, in regard to the bombing of the Orthodox Church in Damascus, uh, a colleague of mine who's Palestinian said he didn't believe it was ISIS. He thought it was the people who are in power in Damascus right now who did it because a lot of the Christians in Syria were in support of the previous government, the Syrian Arab Republic. So, um, what I liked about the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party of Syria is that they brought together Muslims of various sects along with Christians. So yes,
and unlike the Western-backed Ba'ath Party of Saddam Hussein, which was
yeah,
sectarian, which did
mm-hmm.
engage in sectarianism, particularly towards the Kurds, but still, even under Saddam Hussein, Christians were allowed to perform Christianity. Sunnis were allowed to be Sunnis, Shias were allowed to be Shias, and yeah, and there was sectarianism towards the Kurds, but it was only dealt with a lot of brutality when during the Iran-Iraq War, some of the
Mm-hmm.
Kurdish separatists were supporting Iranian forces which were pushing back against Saddam Hussein's invasion of the Iran-Iraq wars. So, like,
Yes,
so one has to always be very careful of of self-determinationist groups, especially if the West is involved, and the West themselves are also conning these people into come support our efforts, but then the West throws these people immediately under the bus, and they immediately did that with the Kurds in Syria, with
mm-hmm.
the Shias, especially when after the first Gulf War, they were told by Bush himself to rise up against Saddam
Yes,
Hussein, and then
in
the
'91.
moment but,
and they were
the
crushed.
moment, the moment they had some kind of a more radical socialist agenda, that was when the West and threw those people under the bus, backed Saddam Hussein's suppression of them, but then put sanctions on Iraq when idiots. So
Yeah,
you have to be
but
very careful.
but it follows the same pattern of divide and rule, divide and conquer, divide and rule. Um, what happened in terms of the situation in the West Asia region and what has happened on the African continent? They have attempted in Nigeria, for example, they divided the various ethnic groups, the regions. They were governed separately. And as a result of that, these divisions were institutionalized and they remained up until this day. Fortunately, though, in some of the largest cities, particularly in the western part of the country, like Lagos, for example, there tends to be more of a uniformity of a culture and philosophical outlook. This is what I've noticed during
And
the most recent period.
So before we talk about the different leaders of Nigeria and their
Mhm.
legacy, just answer this question very briefly. What was Nigeria's place during the Cold War? What was its relations with the Western imperial nations and the USSR and the Communist Socialist Bloc?
Yeah, they tried to play both sides against the middle.
Okay.
They maintained relations, very good relations with the British, who were the former colonial powers. But then they seemed to move closer to the United States, particularly after the discovery of oil and the independence of the country, and then the oil boom of the 1970s, where a lot of money was being made. And you had US based and British based oil companies like Shell Oil, for example, which is European based, and others um, came in and they were making a lot of money in drilling for oil and oil export to the point where a lot of corruption developed inside the country. The corruption was there before, but it worsened. If you have access to billions and billions of dollars and you have people who are corrupt, it's a very, very unhealthy situation for the majority of the people inside that country.
And
So
actually that's a perfect segue into this
yeah.
to this question. Now we're going to talk about the different leaders of Nigeria. So talk
Mm-hmm.
to us about Nigeria, where much of its history it's been led. You already mentioned when responding to all of the different dynamics about Biafra,
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria has been led mostly by far right military tribalistic juntas. Let's start with the period known as military government from 1966 to 1979. And the leaders of that first bloody chapter in post independent Nigeria's history are John Aguiyi-Ironsi, Yakuba Gowon, Murtala Mohammed, and Olusegun Obasanjo. Talk to us about their legacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ironsi was a Igbo leader who staged the first successful military coup d'etat in Nigeria, but he was overthrown several months later by Gowon. So Gowon ruled from about 1966 all the way up until the mid 1970s, when he was removed by Murtala Muhammad. And I mentioned Murtala Muhammad as a populist military leader, but he was assassinated, not too long after he took power. And that's when you had the rise of Olusegun Obasanjo, who had the image more of a statesman internationally. He visited the White House under Jimmy Carter. Like I said, he was involved in negotiations surrounding the independence of Zimbabwe and all that. And even today, he's considered one of the eldest statesmen of the African continent. But no, none of the left-wing parties that had existed had enough support to take state power. And that's a serious problem. The country was reorganized prior to the 1979 elections. Now I believe there are 36 separate states in Nigeria with a population of 230 million people. And the states have their own governments, like, for example, Anambra State, Imo State, Yobe State, all of those, Bornu, they all have their separate state governments. So they have their own internal dynamics in terms of politics there. But yes, it is very difficult. Corruption is still a major issue, and the oil wealth of the country is by no means equally distributed among the working people, the people who are involved in the agricultural system there. So the wealth is largely controlled by a small elite within the country of 230 million people.
And that's a perfect segue to this question, which
Mm-hmm.
is talk to us about Nigeria during the period known as the Second Republic from 1979 to 83. This was a brief. There was a brief period of a civilian government, and the president was a Shanu Shagar of
Yeah,
what's called the
Shagari.
yeah of what's called the Big Tent party of the National Party of Nigeria. How do you assess his time? How do you assess his time in office?
Was not good because he was in power for about 4 years, and he was overthrown by the military,
Yes.
interestingly enough. And yes, he was overthrown. And the military took power again in 1984,
Yeah.
and they stayed there all the way up until 1999. So we're talking about
So
another 15 years of military rule. You had various personalities who were involved in that.
yes. So from 83 to 1993, Nigeria found itself again under a far right military rule under Muhammad Buhari. Uh, I'm not going to spoil it yet, but he's an interesting figure. So
Yeah,
Muhammad Buhari and later Ibrahim Bag
Babangida.
Bagadida. Talk to
Yeah.
us about this period and assessing these two. And assessing these two's legacy, 83 to 93.
Okay, on a foreign policy level, they were active in the United Nations. They were doing stuff in support of freeing South Africa and Namibia from apartheid. That's on a foreign policy level. But domestically, they were still repressing and suppressing the popular will of the people inside of Nigeria. And that was the problem. And this continued up until 1993.
Yes,
And
and
then, go
yeah,
ahead.
and we now enter the period, albeit a brief period, of a civilian government known as the Third Nigerian Republic, which lasted only a few months in 1993 under a politically independent politician by the name Ernest Shonikan. What can you say about his time in office, and what led to the bloody rise of yet another far right military dictatorship?
Mm-hmm. Well, there were elections that were held that year. And after the results were in, elements in the military said that the election was not legitimate. So they prevented the person who was, in fact, supposed to be the next president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And he was imprisoned, in fact, because he would not go along with the decisions made by the military. A man by the name of Sani Abacha emerged as the principal head of state, and he continued his rule for another period of time. Then there was IBB, Ibrahim Babangida, who also was heavily involved in the transitional period that led to Sani Abacha's ascendancy after 1993. Abacha died under very mysterious circumstances.
Yeah.
And that led to the ascendancy of Abu Bakr, who was another military leader. And he turned the country over to civilian rulers after an election of 1999. But who won the elections? It was Olusegun Obasanjo, who became the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria after being involved in a military coup d'etat in the mid-1970s, and who ruled the country as a military leader for several years, retired, turned the country over to Shehu Shagari, who served for 4 years, and he was overthrown by other military leaders who were in fact in office during that particular time period. But yes, so even though elections were held in 1999, a former military leader wound up becoming the president, and he served 2 terms in office.
I want to talk a bit more about Sani Abacha, who many
Mhm.
people say was probably one of the most. I mean, all of the right-wing military dictators were brutal, but a lot of people say that Abacha was particularly brutal. So from 1993 to 1999, this is the period of the unipolar world led by the American Empire or the Anglo-American Empire, and Nigeria finds itself arguably in the worst period of its existence since the Biafra massacres and independence. The far right's thug and hoodlum that forcibly leads the country is Sani Abacha, and if people Google an image of him or see the photo I have of him on Wikipedia, he literally looks like your stereotypical far right military dictator from Africa. And while Mobutu was known for his signature, leopard hats and big, Ray-Ban type glasses, Idi Amin was also known for his, military attire and his military hat. Abacha would sometimes wear sunglasses and it was always in military attire. And he took oppression of the vast majority poor and working class. He took that and political oppression to a whole other level. So, what more can you tell us about Sani Abacha and his legacy, if you even want to call it that?
Yeah, well, he ruled as a military leader. He was instrumental in preventing the rightful winner, what appeared to be the rightful winner of the 1993 elections, who in fact died in prison. And Abacha soon after that died under very mysterious circumstances. So no, his leadership was characterized by repression, corruption, and a further higher level of exploitation of the Nigerian people. Yes, that is his legacy.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, sadly, he didn't die by a left-wing revolution. He wasn't
Mm-mm.
assassinated by a left-wing armed activist. He didn't die by a mysterious plane accident. By a mysterious plane accident. Although, as you mentioned, he died. They claim naturally that he died from a heart attack, but some people suspected he was poisoned because the oppression was just so
Mm-hmm.
intolerable that even the Nigerian elites, and it's mostly the Nigerian elites who prop up these reactionary far right
Mm-hmm.
military juntas, but that even they just could not deal with the level of
Yeah.
oppression. And like Mobutu and other Western backed swindlers and other autocrats in Africa and elsewhere, he was found to have stolen billions of Nigerian money from the treasury, from Nigerian taxpayers, and more in Swiss accounts. And due to mass popular pressure, one of the few times this has ever happened in history, the Swiss, who are notoriously known for their secretive banking laws, it was revealed. My history teacher, my 10th grade history teacher who taught us Africa, he claimed that Abacha only stole $864 million. That's actually being far too generous. It's now actually estimated that $2 to $5 billion,
Mm-hmm.
just like the Mobutu scandals of Congo, Zaire, DRC,
Mm-hmm.
it was found that Abacha was to have stolen $2.5 billion. Your response to this, and also talk to us about the Nigerian hero of that period, the environmental activist, playwright, screenwriter, Ken Saro-Wiwa of the Ogoni people, who was murdered by Abacha and his fascist goons during his time in office.
Yeah, there was a lot of corruption. And I mentioned the oil boom. Nigeria was a part of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. They had
Okay,
served
right.
as chair of that organization. So it was a lot of money that was flowing into the country. They were giving, like in the late 70s and the 80s, they were giving youth there a lot of scholarships to study in Western universities in the US and in Canada. And these students were not only given free tuition paid for by the government, they were given huge stipends, sometimes $1,500 a month. We're talking about 40 years ago, 40, 45 years ago.
From their own
uh,
government to go
from their own
study at
governments.
overpriced universities
Yeah, in the
in
West.
England, Canada, the US, and so
Yeah,
forth.
I met a lot of them in Canada during the 1980s. They were living very well at that
Wow.
time. And all of a sudden, a lot of the money dried up, because of the corruption and political instability inside the country. Yeah, so all this was going on during that particular time period.
And talk to us about the environmental activist,
Ken
playwright,
Saro-Wiwa.
screenwriter Ken Saro-Wiwa of the Ogoni people, who was murdered by Abacha and his fascist goons during that time in during his time in office.
Yeah, they were campaigning against the environmental degradation that was a byproduct of oil exploration in Nigeria. It's not just confined to Ogoni land. Other areas that are oil producing territories have extreme environmental problems. You have broken oil pipelines. There's pollution that exists that has contaminated agricultural production, contaminated water sources inside the country for money. And there's a lot of bribery that goes on. A lot of the government officials of the National Nigerian Petroleum Corporation, which is supposed to be a state-owned enterprise, but there's a lot of corruption. Foreign oil executives often bribe politicians and governmental officials for contracts, and that contributes to underdevelopment because all that money that's being stolen by elites, whether they're government officials, civil servants, takes away from the general living standard of the people inside the country. So the country would be much better off. They would be well off if you had a government that was generally democratic, that was socialist in its orientation, that divided the revenues from the oil, petroleum resources among the people, that reinvested the profits into rebuilding the infrastructure of the country. Oil refineries, for example, are needed there. You have to export crude oil, and then it's refined in other countries and not in your country. And at the same time, you have a situation where the masses are getting even poorer because of the high level of corruption inside the country. The naira, the national currency of Nigeria, is way, way down in comparison to the US dollar. And that was a major issue last year during the End Bad Governance campaign, where so many people were arrested and killed as a result of people demanding better governance in the country. Also, in 2020, there was the End SARS demonstrations and rebellions that took place. This was very interesting because this was under a civilian government of Muhammadu Buhari, who had in fact ruled as a military leader in Nigeria for a period of time
Yeah.
as well. So these people are very well connected politically. But I just wanted to mention that in 2020, they had a campaign against the Stop Armed Robberies Squad. It was a notorious police unit that abused its powers, was involved in robbing people, confiscating their property, killing people, and so forth. And this took place, interestingly enough, right around the same time as the George Floyd rebellion in the United States.
Yes, I
George
remember
Floyd
that.
was
Yeah.
killed on Memorial Day or African Liberation Day, whichever one you choose, in 2020, May 25th. And the whole country erupted in mass demonstrations and rebellions, which lasted for months inside the United States. This was right amid the COVID pandemic. People actually came out defying the restrictions and the bans on gathering and travel and so forth to engage in these mass demonstrations, demanding defunding of the police and other important, very, very important issues. Well, there was a counterpart to that in the Federal Republic of Nigeria called the End SARS campaign, and it went on during the fall of 2020. and a lot of people were killed. A lot of property damage was done. The gateway into the city, the toll and area in Lagos was blockaded by youth demonstrators. It was broken up viciously by the Nigerian police, and this prompted looting, burning. The major TV station at that time was TVC, Television Continental. They started about a decade or more ago, and they were trying to build in my opinion, a genuine Pan-African television network, which is needed to compete with CNN, the CNNs and the BBCs and the RTs and so forth. But they did that for a few years. In fact, they had reached out to me in 2014, I believe it was, and I was a regular consultant for the network on there sometimes 3-4 times a week, talking about various political issues in Africa, internationally, talked about China, all different types of issues. And they had correspondents and affiliates across the African continent and even in the West. But after a few years, it broke down. Possibly inefficiency, maybe overextending itself, possibly corruption. I don't know the details of it, but they liquidated the TVC Continental. It's still called TVC. TVC Africa, which was a Pan-African oriented television network. And they also had a TVC Entertainment, which dealt with music and films and all this kind of stuff. Yes. But they kept the TVC Nigeria, which is interesting because they cut back on coverage of developments in other African countries and also internationally. But they did have programs like world news programs, where they would invite me to come on via Zoom to discuss different issues that were taking place. I believe this happened, the breakdown happened around, I think it was around 2017. So they laid off a lot of journalists during that particular time period. Then in 2020, as I mentioned, to go back to 2020, that station was attacked by demonstrators. It was attacked, buildings and windows were smashed, and it was also burned, destroyed beyond its capacity to function. This was in 2020. So the TVC network was destroyed as a result of the demonstrations and rebellions in response to the End SARS campaign. So this was a major setback for the Federal Republic of Nigeria in their efforts, to build a viable communication television network. Now, there are other TV stations there, Arise TV, there are others as well. But I think TVC had marked, a turning point in Africa, even though the government itself was not necessarily progressive. But it reminded me of the efforts of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah when he set up Ghana National Television in 1964. That was the first director was Shirley Graham Du Bois, the widow of Dr. W.B. Du Bois, who died in Ghana in August of 1963.
Yeah.
She stayed on there, and she became a high-ranking official in the CPP government, the Convention People's Party government in Ghana. And Nkrumah appointed her as the director of Ghana National Television. She served that role for 2 years until a coup, a CIA-backed coup of February of 1966, where she was placed under house arrest and eventually was allowed to leave the country. And she resettled in Egypt part-time and also in the People's Republic of China, where she died in 1977.
It's
still missing. The Continental Television Network still does not exist. I mean, the South African Broadcasting Corporation in South Africa, they don't operate in the same manner as the BBC, for example, or CNN, or Russia Today, RT. they or the China Global Television Network. So that is a major missing element on the African continent. It needs to be some country that can develop a high-powered television network that can reach people all over the world, that could cover Africa as a whole and the world events and how they relate to developments in Africa.
Yeah, and yeah, it's funny how a lot of how a lot of Nigeria's uh yeah, you could call them leftists or people power
Mhm.
folks are often folks that come from the world of arts. And Ken Saro-Wiwa of the
Yeah,
Ogoni people, this environmental activist, this eco justice activist, as well as a
right.
racial justice activist, he came from that world of Nigerian script writing and also was
Mhm.
a novelist and so forth. And it was a huge tragedy when he was
Yeah, he was arrested. They were put on a
and murdered
sham
by a
trial,
bacha.
and they were executed. So it's really outrageous what happened, and the problems with the oil industry still exist in Nigeria.
And
Still contamination is going on, oil spills, all of that, and the masses, as was indicative of what happened last year, are still upset about the lack of good governance and also the lack of basic necessities of life,
exactly.
like clean water, adequate housing, food. Yes, and there's so
Now,
many contradictions that exist there.
before we talk about the Fourth Republic, and before we talk about Fela Kuti, 1998 to 1998 to 1999 was the last
Yes,
period Nigeria was ruled by a far right military dictatorship. What can you tell us about the legacy of
Abdul Salam Abu
and
Bakr.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, he was just a transitional leader. Um, he said his goal was just to hold office until national elections could be held,
Well, that's
which
nice of
happened
him.
in 1999. So
Well, that's nice of him.
yeah, right. That's what he said. So he wasn't in office that long, and he allowed the elections to take place. He did not interfere with the outcome of the elections, which brought Mr. Obasanjo back to power, this
All
time as
right.
a civilian leader who served 2 terms in Nigeria. Yeah.
Okay, now before we talk about that guy and his very important political party, which dominates Nigeria's political scenes, we have to talk about this person. So, before we talk about the Fourth Republic of Nigeria and present day Nigeria, which you've already skipped a couple of chapters to
Right.
Abayomi,
Jumping ahead.
we have to talk about Nigeria. Well, one cannot talk about Nigeria without talking about one of the greatest national heroes, also one of Nigeria's greatest exports, forget oil, but also Africa's greatest cultural and politically left Pan-Africanist hero, and that is Fela Kuti. Before we talk about him, I have to say this. What Bob Marley and Peter Tosh are to Jamaica, what John Lennon was to the UK and the US, an entire lefty generation of the 60s and 70s, what the many Brazilian leftist musicians from Caetano Veloso, Elis Regina, Gal Gilberto, Tim Maia, and what Victor Hara and Pablo Neruda were to Chile, these guys were more than artists. They were frontline heroes in people power movements. That is Fela Kuti, who had released a whopping 56 albums in his lifetime. And if you want to include the posthumous ones and the live albums, that's 77 albums. His cocktail music was a mix of fusion, jazz, funk, Nigerian music, and several other African musics. And if you take the kind of blunt attitude of NWA and early political left wing rap like Boogie Down Productions and Gangstar and graffiti artists like Keith Haring and the Bassaquette. And if you take the sort of blunt and artists, present day artists like Kendrick Lamar, that is Afrobeat in a nutshell. That is Fela Kuti. Fela lived through the first Nigerian president, Azikiwe, to Ibrahim Bagida, and he died during the rule of Abacha in 1997. Abayomi, what is your assessment of Fela Kuti? His positive legacy, not only in speaking out against the Nigerian state, but similar ones in the continent, and his truly radical African pride and Pan-Africanism. I'm curious your response.
Yes, he studied music, was very well versed in musical composition. He was in England. Then he went on a tour in 1969 of the United States and spent some time in Los Angeles and was influenced by developments during that period in the U.S., the Black Power movement, civil rights, the Black Panther Party, Pan-Africanism, and he went back to Nigeria and was incorporating a lot of these ideas into his music, into the style of the music, which, as you mentioned, was a combination of various genres of African music from the continent as well as internationally. You could hear elements of Sly and the Family Stone, Sly, who just died recently here in the
rest in
US.
peace, Sly. Yeah.
James Brown, for example, comes through. His funk style of music comes through in Fela's music, as well as traditional Yoruba music and his own creative application of synthesizing all of these various genres into something that was very new, very different, and very pioneering, what was termed Afrobeat music. And he had various groups. Africa 70 was one of the earlier ones. Egypt 80 was the final group, I believe. But anyway, he was a phenomenon, and he put him on a collision course with the military regime in Nigeria. He was indicted on various criminal charges, trumped up charges. Once they accused him of stealing an automobile that belonged to the wife of a minister and within the government. He was arrested for possession and use of cannabis. Just, ridiculous type stuff because he was so critical of the Nigerian military apparatus. The album Zombie, for example, was a parody on the character of the military regime in Nigeria. And I understand that that album was recently awarded some type of Grammy award, as being one of the greatest albums released in the modern period. So yes, he was arrested, and it was in 1977. It was in the late 70s that his home, the so-called Calacuta, was raided by the Nigerian military. And his mother, who I mentioned earlier, Funmilayo Ransom, who was instrumental in the independence of Nigeria and had very progressive politics, was thrown out of a window by these soldiers and died as a result of her injuries. And Fela came out with an album entitled Coffin for a Head of State. Now, people should listen to that album. It's phenomenal. The music that comes out and the lyrics as well. He had a lot of problems. In fact, a certain period, he had gone to Ghana and had set up shop there for a period of time, playing concerts extensively in Ghana. And then he returned to Nigeria. But at the same time, he was always at odds with the Nigerian government. I remember back in the 1980s, he was on his way to the United States for a tour. I believe it was in 1985, and he was arrested either on the airplane or he was trying to get on the airplane and charged with currency fraud. And he spent probably a year or a year and a half in jail again, and there was a whole international campaign to have him released. Well, he was released, and he did come to the U.S., and I did see him in 1986 at the Fox Theater downtown, put on an absolutely incredible concert, about a 3-hour concert. And
exactly, because his songs were notoriously long.
And it was interesting.
The reason why he had a whopping 56 albums is because his songs were notoriously long. So take a song like Confusion. 16 minutes, that takes up already side one of the LP, and then the rest of the song, because it's like Confusion Parts
Mhm.
1 and Parts 2, the rest of the song is on the other side of the album. So he was no he notoriously did very, very, long
Mhm.
songs, which for people who love techno and house music, this is a dream come true. I mean, it's like but yes, he notoriously did very, very long songs. I think he even beat Miles Davis' record when
Oh
it
yeah.
came to stuff like that.
What's interesting is that when you saw him live, in many cases the songs were much longer. He would extend them, much longer during his live
Wow.
concerts. And the first, I remember in '86 when I saw him, I think he only had two songs. You know, so he played one, which was about an hour or so, and then they had an intermission. He came back and played the final song. And I remember one of them was called Just Like That. And the other song was called, what was the other song called? It escapes me right now, but
Uh,
these were
uh,
great songs.
Shuffling and fighting, shimmering and shuffling, or
No,
something
I
like
think that was earlier. I believe that was earlier.
that. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I know what it was. Teacher, don't teach me no nonsense.
Yeah, brilliant song, brilliant one. He has his body of work is I mean his
Yeah,
body of work
right.
is his body of work is
Yeah,
incredible. I think my personal favorite. I think my if I had to pick like a top five, because I was binge listening to a lot of Fela Kuti this week,
yeah.
and even in preparation today, I was listening to a lot of Fela Kuti, and my own personal favorite is probably Confusion, uh, ITT, International Thief, an
Yeah,
unreleased one called Big Blind Country, BBC, and then Army Arrangement is also
yeah,
fantastic,
that's a great album.
and and of course Beast No
Beast of No
Nations.
Nation. Yeah,
All
right.
of these are epic songs and epic body of work. So
Mhm. Yeah, and his music became popular, across West Africa and the continent as a whole, internationally. He used to tour a lot in Europe when he could, and also the United States. And he came back in '86. He was there, and then he came back in 1990 for another tour. The last one that I recall was in 1991, and after that, his health began to deteriorate, and he died in 1997, uh, ostensibly from HIV and AIDS. At least that's what his brother said, who was a renowned medical doctor in
yeah,
Nigeria. When he made the announcement, it was published in the New York Times that he had died of AIDS. It killed a lot of people on the continent during the
it could
1980s and 1990s. And that's why it's so vicious what Donald Trump is doing by having U.S. aid cut off, well, destroyed actually, and also cut off the supply of antiretroviral drugs for HIV positive and AIDS patients in Africa and other parts of the world. They were being distributed free because they saw the AIDS pandemic as being a threat to the public health of the world. And it was, and still is. So it makes no sense, what Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans are doing right
exactly.
now. Uh, even questioning the viability of vaccines for childhood diseases like measles, which are reemerging. This is a disease that had been virtually wiped out for over 60 years in the United States. And now you have
Making a huge comeback. Yeah.
significant outbreaks of measles because of all this anti-vaccine propaganda that's being pushed by the ultra right.
In fact, we're actually going to do stay with us, folks. We actually are going to do a bonus episode of One Plus One where we talk about Fela Kuti, and I actually do have a question prepared when it comes to a fella dying of AIDS and a lot of the tragedy involved in that. Let's get back to Nigerian history, though. So,
Mm-hmm.
and yes, and again, one cannot talk about Nigerian history without talking about Fela Kuti. While the left is very weak in Nigeria and has sadly always been very weak, that was a Pan Africanist leftist that was really at the front row seat
Mm-hmm.
and he could have gone into exile 10 times over and he constantly chose to always stay in
Right,
politics
return.
and fight the far-right military junta.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so getting back to Nigerian history. So Nigeria, they might have gotten rid of, they might have gotten rid of the far right military dictatorship. Knock on wood and pray hard that it never returns. But since the civilian rule, the party that has been led by the party that's been in power mostly has been a far right civilian political party called the People's Democratic Party, and this is one of those right wing parties where you get the worst of both worlds because not only are they fiscally conservative, regressive, but they're also socially conservative or socially regressive, as I prefer to say. They are members of the African affiliate of Democrat Union of Africa, which is where all the center-right to far-right parties in Africa meet to see how they can help one another out and advance a right-wing agenda. And the DUA is the African affiliate of the International Democracy Union, which is an international alliance where, again, center-right, but now even far-right parties need to foster solidarity and how to advance a right-wing agenda. And its chairman is Stephen Harper, formerly of the Reform Party, former Prime Minister of Canada under the Conservative Party. Stephen Harper, of course, the Reform Party used to be considered a fringe right-wing populist party in Canada, and they merged with the progressive conservatives in Canada. So that's why Stephen Harper is very keen on trying to get far-right parties to come on board. Now, we're not going to talk about all the leaders during what's presently called the Fourth Republic, but how do you assess the period, which is the end of the 90s, the 2000s, and 2010s? And I'm particularly interested in the legacy of Good Luck Jonathan. Your response?
Okay. Yeah, well, the same neoliberal approach to economic policy. They were involved during this period in various peacekeeping operations that took place, particularly in Sierra Leone. And they played a positive role there in defeating the so-called RUF there, which was involved in rebel activity in Sierra Leone, similar to what was going on in Liberia at the time period. So what happened was that they sent their troops in there to reinstall the elected leader of Sierra Leone. This took place during the late 1990s. So after that, there were various leaders that have been in office. One died in office. And then, of course, you had the rise of another political leader in the PDP. He was very ineffective in terms of governing the country.
You're talking about Good Luck Jonathan or the second leader or the second leader of the PDP?
Yeah, Good Luck Jonathan.
Okay.
Was not very effective. In fact, it was under his leadership that the Boko Haram problem began in 2009, when the military cracked down on the Boko Haram group that was based in northern Nigeria. Now, some people say that in Maiduguri and other areas that there were politicians that supported Boko Haram. And the military stepped in and tried to crush them, kill their leader. This is during 2009. And as a result, they became a underground armed rebel organization, Boko Haram. And they still exist. They don't appear to be as strong as they were during the period of the 2010s. And they split into different factions. You have Boko Haram. There's also the Islamic State of West Africa as well. They've also spread their influence from northern Nigeria into Cameroon, and also into the central, also Cameroon, and also other areas in Chad, for example. And they formed an alliance. The militaries of Cameroon, Nigeria, and Chad had formed a unified front to try to fight Boko Haram. But the Boko Haram actions, starting in 2009, this thing has lasted all the way to today, 2025. So we're talking about what, 16 years of this insurgency that had existed largely in the northeast of the country, and the lawlessness and the violence, the kidnappings, the murders, has impacted the overall society in North as well as Central Nigeria. So now you have kidnappings that are taking place specifically for criminal and monetary reasons. People are being kidnapped for ransom, and they have no particular political orientation. So this is a problem. Also, you had clashes in the central part of the country between people who are herdsmen and those who are agriculturalists. And they attribute this to the Fulani herdsmen who have lived this lifestyle for centuries. So there's clashes there. There have been deaths. There have been criminal activities involving kidnapping of school children and others. So in many parts of central and northern Nigeria, the situation is very, very grim and very unstable. Now, Muhammadu Buhari, no, go ahead.
Well, I just what else do you think led to the outbreak of the extreme Islamic backward group known as Boko Haram, and what do you feel it's important to know about them that corporate media distorts, but even left-wing and left-leaning media has gone wrong about their understanding of Boko Haram? And I should also just add this: a far-right Republican, well, the Republican Party is a far right party, but a Republican senator, I believe it was his name, Scott Pelley, opens up a huge can of worms during a Senate testimony. I don't know what the context it was, but he accused the U.S. government through USAID of fostering Boko Haram. I believe Minpress News' Instagram page also said that there were documents and secret whistleblowers who don't want their identity revealed, who also said that Boko Haram, just like ISIS, was a product of the U.S. Government itself as a way to destabilize and do very petty divide and conquering in Nigeria. I'm curious your response.
That could be the case. In fact, for a period of time under the Obama administration, they refused to categorize Boko Haram as a terrorist group. And at the same time, they were withholding armaments from the Nigerian military to fight Boko Haram because they said there were human rights violations involved and innocent people were being killed in Nigerian military operations in the northern part of the country. So yes, this has been a major allegation in that regard, but it could be true. Even though Nigeria is a capitalist-oriented country, it's by no means anti-imperialist or anti-capitalist, but at the same time, they still have over 220 million people. They have petroleum, they have natural gas. Yes, they would want to destabilize them, to divide them so they don't unite, so they don't become a threat or a powerhouse in the West Africa region.
Yeah, very tragic. And I think, I think where the allegations that Boko Haram is definitely some kind of a Western proxy is the fact that they have voiced solidarity with ISIS, and much of ISIS, and much of ISIS. These are facts. These are not conspiracy theories. These are just incontrovertible facts. The WikiLeaks has revealed this all. You know, ISIS comes from Saudi Arabia. It comes from the UAE. It comes from Qatar. It even comes from Jordan, which is ironic because they're supposed to be a secular monarch. And of course, these are allies of the West, and the West, of course. So I would not be surprised if Boko Haram was just, was an offshoot directly.
Yeah, a former colleague of mine who's an engineer, and he was hired to work for some company. Uh, they were doing a lot of work, in the Gulf countries. He used to travel to Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and so forth. And he told me that these groups had offices in these countries, that they function openly.
Wow.
So the Saudi Arabian link, the Gulf monarchy links are very important. I mean, if you look at what happened in Mozambique, in the northern part of the country, in Cabo Delgado, where you had a group that surfaced several years ago calling itself Al Shabaab, even though they said they were not connected with the Al Shabaab in Somalia.
Yeah.
And their job was to just disrupt this national liquefied natural gas project in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, and they actually disrupted it. It had to be closed down. And then the Southern African Development Community sent their peacekeeping troops in, along, interestingly enough, with the Rwandan Patriotic Army. And they were able to beat back these rebels and to resume this liquefied natural gas project that was being run by ExxonMobil. So we
And the
don't know
destruction and also the destruction of Libya has helped
those
foster a lot
people.
of backwards Wahhabi Takfiri groups. So
Qatari special forces were involved. Uh, yeah, they had these, ISIS, Al Qaeda linked groups who they said were Libyans, but in fact, they were the ones that they utilized as ground troops while the U.S. and other NATO forces were bombing, and NATO allies were bombing Libya, civilian areas, destroying them, destroying infrastructure, and that's how they were able to dislocate people inside the country and eventually trap and murder Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, brutally murdered him in October of 2011. And since that time period, Libya has been incapable of forming a national government, has been fighting just in the last several months in the capital of Tripoli. The country went from being the most prosperous in Africa to being a source for human trafficking, internecine conflict, and so forth. So yes, they have plans for all of these African countries to divide them, prevent them from uniting, to prevent regional as well as continental unity in order to maintain the dominance of Western imperialism. That's why they fear BRICS. BRICS is not a socialist formation. It's not a communist alliance. It's just developing countries from the global south, including Russia, which has been aligned with countries in the global south for various reasons. And they're extremely threatened by BRICS. Even Trump was saying he was going to specifically target the BRICS nations with tariffs and other forms of economic measures. So yes, this is what's going on in Nigeria. And look at what's happening in neighboring Cameroon. The country is divided in the midst of a civil war between the areas that were colonized by England and the other areas that were colonized by France. Makes no sense.
and when we talk about Nigeria, I find this is quite interesting. From May 1999 to May 2015. So safe to say that the period of Goodluck Jonathan and his predecessors has been terrible for Nigeria. From May 1999 to May 2015, the People's Democratic Party, which oddly enough, their color symbols and flags looks like the Italian flag, and right-wing parties like Forza Italia, and they're led by the late Silvio Berlusconi. But after that period in Nigeria, Nigeria has been under the control and governance of the All Progressive Congress, and like the PDP and like the PDP, who have no business using the slogan "power to the people" when they give nothing but power to mainly Western multinational corporations. The All Progressive Congress is also, I would say, it's also very right wing, an African capitalist party, also very socially conservative. Its first democratically elected leader was a former far right military junta, Muhammad Buhari. However, from what my research on Wikipedia tells me, the party does lean left on some issues regarding socioeconomics, It's a member of Socialist International, though one can argue how really left-wing SI is because it's dominated by Western and Nordic social democratic centre-left parties that have shifted hard to the right, especially on socioeconomics on their own population, and is more aggressively imperialist on its foreign policy. So I'm curious, how do you assess Nigeria's time under Buhari and his successor Bola
Tinubu.
Tinubu? And Femi Kuti, Fela Kuti's son, said that if his father was alive today, he would probably die from blood pressure because there's no way his father would have accepted civilians voting for Buhari, given Buhari's epic crimes against humanity when he was a far-right military dictator. I'm curious your response.
Well, Buhari, he got into office saying he could end the Boko Haram insurgency within 6 months. This is what he told the Nigerian electorate. I watched him on TVC when I was doing work with him during that period. He got in office and not too much changed. In fact, many aspects of national security worsened because you had criminal elements in the central and northern part of the country who began to carry out similar operations as Boko Haram. So it really didn't work in that regard. And he served his 2 terms. And then Bola Tinubu comes in last year. Interestingly enough, we talked about this earlier. It appeared as if Peter Obi from the Nigerian Labour Party was going to win the elections. And it turned out that he didn't win the elections. I thought he was going to win the elections. He was doing well in the polls. And in the early results, he had won Lagos, the Lagos state, which is probably the most diverse area because it encompasses the commercial capital of Lagos, which has probably 20 million residents. The fact that he won that, it looked good, that they would get another party, a Labour Party that was committed, at least on paper, to reforms inside the country. But when all the votes were counted, the Electoral Commission said, Bola Tinubu won from the All Progressives Congress, which is not progressive, in my opinion. Both these parties, the PDP and the APC, both have very good names. The People's Democratic Party, I mean, that sounds good, doesn't it?
Exactly.
The All Progressives Congress, doesn't that sound good?
Yeah, no, and in fact, let me. Sorry to interrupt, but let me just read this
No
again.
problem.
The People's, Democratic Party, their slogan is "Power to the People."
Yes, like the Black Panther Party or the ANC. Yeah, right.
So yeah, continue.
Yeah, so that's all I'm saying is that they're still maintaining the same neoliberal outlook. And last year, after Tinubu Gatnian had been confirmed as the head of state in the country, people didn't see any improvement. So they called for the End Bad Governance campaign, and it was crushed. I mentioned all the people that were arrested, that were killed, the young people that were charged with treason because they were carrying Russian Federation flags. So yes, this is the current situation in Nigeria right now, that the currency, the value in comparison to the US dollar is extremely weak. And the country right now is in a very, very difficult situation because of everything else that's going on around the world in regard to the Ukraine-Russian war, the escalating situation that's taking place in West Asia. So all of these international events have an impact on Africa and its capacity to develop economically as well as politically.
My second to last question is this: how do you, assess Nigeria today, and how do you think Nigeria is going to ever end its cycle of far-right tyranny? And my follow-up question is, why do you think there hasn't been a strong left-wing movement or a strong left-wing political party in opposition in a country rich with oil, where even an eco-socialist movement is so badly needed? And why hasn't there been a left-wing figure like a Hugo Chavez, Rafael Correa, Evo Morales, or someone like Pedro Castillo that ran on a massive national on a massive platform that talks of massive nationalization of oil, profits going to the poor, and wealth spread to help out small businesses, pay for education of all ages, and get social mobility going and so forth, or even approach tribal politics the way Argentina's left under both Nestor and Krista Krishna, or however, or Lula and Delma of the Workers' Party in Brazil have done it when it comes to addressing the indigenous people and the diverse communities in those respective countries. How come? Yeah, I'm curious your response on that when we talk about Nigeria, and if you even want to broaden it towards the continent, so go right ahead.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the character of colonialism inside the country, the divide and rule methodology of dominance, and then the whole disjointed independence process where regional interests dominated electoral politics, the successive military coups that have taken place inside the country, and also corruption, which directly derives from the legacy of colonialism inside of Nigeria. So I believe that is the reason why. Although they do have strong trade union movements inside the country that have engaged in general strikes over the last few years around prices, the need to raise the minimum wage in Nigeria. And all these issues are still very, very important. And the trade union movement is large inside the country, and they have tremendous potential. But you still have a strong military that wants to maintain control and maintain an alliance with the West. And I believe that is the reason why the left wing has not been able to take power in Nigeria. Even a social democratic party like the Labour Party, headed by Peter Obi, I believe it was corruption. I believe the elections were stolen from him. Not that he's a blazing revolutionary socialist, but he did say he wanted reforms. He wanted to improve the conditions for working people. If you read the manifesto and the program of the Nigerian Labour Party, it represents a new route in regard to national development. But as long as you have a strong military, as long as you have the influence of the US and of Britain and the European Union, it's going to be very, very difficult for any type of revolutionary, democratic, or socialist transformation in Nigeria. But I believe it will happen. This whole process has to be exhausted. We're talking about 65 years of national independence, yet at the same time, the majority of the people living in the country are still poor, underdeveloped, unhoused, and lacking adequate nutrition.
Yes, and actually, funnily enough, before Sani Abacha got into power, it was the Nigerian Social Democratic Party, which was basically on the verge of winning, and then the crooks in office in Nigeria basically discounted them, and almost helped pave the way for Sani Abacha to get into power. So there's a lot of hostility and a lot of fear if even a modest social democratic party gets into power in Nigeria.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at Ghana, for example. They were pioneers in the national liberation movement and won power largely through general strikes and mass mobilizations in 1957. Well, in 51, they won the first election under the new constitution, which made Kwame Nkrumah leader of government business. That was the title they gave him. And he had to be liberated from prison in order to take office. And then there was a transitional process between 1951 and 54, where he became prime minister. And then between 54 and 56, where they moved towards independence in 1957. But his government became a republic in 1960. But then 6 years later, it was overthrown, largely at the aegis of the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, they used the police and lower ranking military officers to seize power. And interestingly enough, one CIA operative who had supposedly inside information on what happened, he said it was done in a way to make it appear as if the Ghanaians had overthrown Nkrumah, when in fact the whole situation was engineered by the Central Intelligence Agency. So they're going to continue to do this. You look at what's happening in the Sahel region, there are constant coup attempts, assassination attempts against Ibrahim Traore and others. And they're not going to stop until the masses get strong enough in order to crush these people politically, ideologically, as well as militarily.
Interesting. Well, we were joined on this All Things Africa edition, learning about the history and current affairs of Nigeria with our always wonderful returning champion, historian, journalist, and Pan-Africanist leftist and all-round anti-imperialist and supporter of people power movements, Abayomi Azikiwe, of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Check out his work and all of his appearances on 1+1. Subscribe to Pan-African Newswire and BAR. Donate generously to them, and don't forget to do the same for 1+1. Donate to us, and please, because I am very strongly considering ending 1+1. Do share widely all of 1+1's content and encourage others to like us. And because 1+1's unable to share its stuff on Facebook, greatly appreciate if everybody would do that. So again, please do share and donate. The next bet 1+1 is not going to be ending soon. We're still going to be consuming our all things Africa. Next week, the country we'll be exploring is Nigeria. So join us next week for that. Have a great weekend, folks. Good night and good luck. And join us. We are going to do a special bonus episode of 1+1 talking about Fela Kuti. So join us then.